Abbey Dental, sponsors of Women Today, for all aspects of today's dental care. Highly recommended throughout the Isle of Man.
Faster, my good afternoon. It's just gone 5 minutes past 2, and we're back on the Conister Rock today, as it is a Friday. So myself, Christy DeHaven, with, of course, one of our best loved personalities from the island, where we'll be spending an hour sharing music and memories with them. And to ask today's guest to share music and memories with us in just 1 hour is a mighty request, because Mitch Murray's life is music. Well, mostly. Having said that, he's also the author of 5 books, the master of the one-liner, a much-admired after-dinner speaker, the youngest director of the Performing Rights Society, an avid autograph hunter, photographer of sorts, more of that in just a moment, father to 2 West End stars, and so much more. And yet, Mitch, going right back to the beginning, as a child, you escaped a German bomber which seemed hell-bent on putting pay to any of this incredible life happening in the first place. First of all, thank you so much for being with us this afternoon.
Real pleasure to be here.
And very thankful that German bomber missed its mark.
Well, he was machine gunning at the time, so I think he'd used his bombs up in the middle of town, and he was just getting off a few rounds of a machine gun.
Unbelievable. And this was in Reading, wasn't it?
In
where
Reading,
where
yes.
you grew up.
Well, yeah.
And actually, having said that, you say it sort of missed its mark, but your mother, from what I understand, was supposed to be at an appointment with somebody who was actually very sadly killed in that attack. So that may well have been her fate if she'd been there.
Well, it was the mayor's secretary phoned her to say he can't make the appointment that she had with him. And it was the secretary who was killed in the bombing raid. The mayor escaped because he couldn't make that appointment, and my mother escaped as well.
Gosh.
So there we are. World War II was full of stories like that, none of which I remember.
That's a pretty difficult one to forget, though, to be fair,
yes,
isn't it?
It was a good one. I do remember that. And I was 3, and so I can pinpoint when I remembered, when my memories started to operate, and that was a really good one.
And obviously that's something of a very dramatic story, but what were some of your sort of happiest childhood memories then? What sort of sticks out for you?
Well, the really happy ones,
Yeah.
Hanging around on a beach and playing with little animals that you saw for the first time, and you'd meet a little bird or a little a pussy cat or something like that. So those things are always warm memories, weren't they?
So very much out in nature and sort of outside, in the great outdoors.
Well, it was before there were hamburgers and hot dogs, you see, so had to have something else to go.
They were very quick to follow, though, weren't they, at the end of the day? Yeah. So when did you first sort of really experience music, and when did you sort of think that could be my life?
Well, my first memory of a favourite song was round about that sort of time, maybe 1944, I suppose, something like that. It was a song called "You Are My Sunshine," and it was always my favourite. And I remember. You're never sure if you remember it or if people remind you of what you liked at the time. But I'm pretty sure that I did love it, and I have done ever since.
Well, let's hear a little bit of that. Now, the version that you've chosen is one that I hadn't previously heard, and it's by one of the ultimate singers of all time, isn't it?
Bing Crosby, who once turned down one of my songs.
I was going to ask you that. He turned down one of yours. Tell us that story.
Oh, well, it's no story. When they turn it down, you've got no story. It's only when they take it to the top of the charts that you've got a story.
What was it? What was the song?
It was, hang on a second. Now, there we are. That proves why he turned it down. I can't even remember.
So it wasn't something that then went on to be a hit for somebody else?
It wasn't.
No. Well,
otherwise I'd have told you that first.
Well, let's hear that wonderful delivery then. This is Mitch Murray's first choice this afternoon. Bing Crosby, "You Are My Sunshine."
The other night, dear, as I lay sleeping, I dreamed I held you in my arms.
you know, I have to say, Mitch, my mum will be so pleased that you chose that song, because she used to sing that to me as a child.
Really?
And it's, yeah, I think she has it as her ringtone, in fact, for every time I call her.
Oh, lovely.
So there you go, Bing Crosby, You and My Sunshine. And we were just chatting about it in the background there, because I think a lot of people think it's, you know, sort of very joyful and very lovely and very sweet and innocent sort of song. But it has an interesting background, doesn't it?
Yes. Oh, you've got to have a few lines like that sometimes in songs, haven't you, really?
Yeah. I think
Make them
most
wake
people...
up halfway through.
Well, but there you go. That's the thing, you see, because obviously you are known for being an incredibly successful songwriter. And in fact, before we chat more, for those people who, most people know a number of your songs, but we've got a little compilation here of some of your top hits. So I'm just going to let it play just to remind people of the success that you have had.
I like it, I like it. I like the way you run your fingers through my head. Even the bad times are good. As soon as I get to you, baby. How do you do what you do to me? I wish I knew. If I knew how you do it to me, I'd do it to you. I'm telling you now. I'm telling you right away. I'll be staying for many a day. I'm in love with you. You were made for me. Everybody tells me so. Had a whole lot of fun, but now the time has come. I need the sweet, sweet touch of a woman's love. Yes, I did what I did for Maria. I did what I did for Maria. In the avenues and alleyways. While you sleep, there's a whole world coming alive. Look around the jungle, see the rough and tumble. Listen to a squealer cry. Billy, don't be a hero. Don't be a fool with your life. Bonnie and Clyde were pretty looking people, but I can tell you people, they were the devil's children. Bonnie and Clyde began their evil doing one lazy afternoon down Savannah Way.
Do you know, Mitch, I think if we carried on playing these songs back to back, it would take us about a week to get through them all. You've had the most ridiculous number of hit
Well,
songs.
the following week I wrote even more.
So those took you about a day and a half, did they?
Yes. Total.
How long does it take then to craft a hit song?
Well, the main bones of a hit song happen in an hour or two, really, because you know you've got something really magic very, very quickly. Then the hard work begins. Then you've got to make things work and make things fall into place. And that can take a long time.
So is there a sort of formula? I mean, I know obviously it took you an entire book to write how to write a hit song, but is there a sort of formula that you can stick by? So could you learn how to craft a hit song?
No, you can get a lot of things. You can get a lot of hints for saving time, not having to waste your time going up the wrong way. But really, and everybody who says it's not inspiration, it's perspiration, that's rubbish. It's 99% inspiration, because you can come in and start writing one day and you can go on and nothing will happen. Another time you'll come in and you'll crack. A good example, Les Reed and Barry Mason, who wrote The Last Waltz, a whole load of songs in one, Delilah. They had the bare bones of each one of those within about 2 hours.
Oh, gosh.
And then they came back later and developed them into songs. But that bit of inspiration happened in a very, very short time.
Because I've heard people say in other interviews talking about songs that some people feel like the sort of the best songs just sort of fall onto your lap.
Yes.
That they just sort of drop from somewhere. Has that happened with you?
Yeah, well, they do. And what you're doing really is it's a little bit like a jazz musician. And you've got a basic, you're playing around with tunes and things, and you're improvising. And as you improvise, and when you're writing songs, I'm trying to listen to what I'm writing as if I were a third party. I want to hear that for the first time, even though it's coming from me. And when you do that, you then won't settle for anything less than something really catchy. And you just throw the stuff away. You end up throwing most of this stuff away because it's just not good enough. And unless you're realistic with what you're doing, you're going to have a catalogue full of old draggy stuff. And so this way it concentrates what you're doing.
Have any of your more successful songs surprised you at how successful they've been?
Well, Down Came the Rain certainly did that, because that was written as a comedy. Even though there's not a funny line in it, it was written as a comedy performance of an idea. And in Italy, somebody said, "Hey, that is a very nice tune." And it was a big group at the time called I Giganti. And they copied it. They covered it. And they did a completely straight ballad, a passionate ballad based on that song. And later, many years, and it went to number one and sold 360,000 copies or something in Italy. And some years later, I suddenly started getting money from Italy, better money than I'd ever had. And it took me time to find out why. And it was an artist called Mina, who was a very, very big star in Italy. And she'd covered it on an album. And it took off. And everybody started covering it. So I've now got loads, and it's one of my biggest earners, even though it only went to number, 7 over here or something like silly, 17, who knows.
And that must be really satisfying for you, because it was also one that you performed.
Yes, well, that wasn't the reason it was satisfying. It was satisfying because of the money it made.
Well said, that man. It does beg the question, though, nowadays as to whether or not songwriters can ever really have that same sort of success, because it's such a different industry now, isn't it?
Very different to compare. It's very, very different. So different I couldn't even tell you what the difference is. You know what I mean? Because it was just... There was a bunch of us in those days. There were, people like Les Reed, Barry Mason, Roger Greenaway, Roger Cook, Tony Macaulay, and we're all still friends, actually. But we were all sort of bespoke songwriters. We would write for an artist with an artist in mind. Usually, the artist happened to be at number one in the charts, because we knew if we got somebody who was number one in the charts and we wrote their next single, we had a much better chance of making it. And that's part of the trick, of course. So that the songs you'll find that written by people like me at that time were written very often for somebody else completely. I wrote You Were Made for Me with the Searchers in mind. And they turned it down, and it went to Freddie and the Dreamers and, helped their career instead,
And that's the thing, that must have been a wonderful thing to know, that you essentially launched the careers of a number of bands that became hugely successful.
Well, a good thing was Tom Jones, who I never recorded any of my songs, and Gordon Mills, his manager, used to turn everything down that I ever approached him with. Not through anything personal, he just didn't see them, And so all those songs, I later went to Tony Christie. We found Tony Christie and started producing him with all the songs that Tom Jones turned down. And if you listen to Tony Christie, you can hear why. And not why he turned them down, but why Tony Christie became, used those songs. So.
Absolutely. Huge hits they were as well.
And he was a terrific singer. Fabulous voice, Tony.
Yeah. And that was when you sort of launched into producing as well, so we'll talk about that a little bit later. But before we go to the break, Mitch, we've just heard a selection of just a few of your hit songs there. Is there any one of them that you're sort of more proud of than the others, or one that you are sort of particularly more fond of?
Yes, I've always got a soft spot for the first number one. I think you'll find most songwriters say that, which was How Do You Do It by Jerry and the Pacemakers. And that launched it. And then, of course, because it was How Do You Do It by Jerry and the Pacemakers, and in fact, the Beatles recorded it first. And then Jerry and the Pacemaker, and I turned that down, and they turned me down at the same time. So they didn't want another song.
Explain that. You didn't like what they'd done with it.
That's right. And I felt that they'd messed it up purposely, because they were the Beatles. who do they think they are? Lennon and McCartney? No, I mean, I really felt that they sort of didn't put their best into it. Let's put it that way. And they've admitted to that ever since, you know. And you can't blame them. We're talking about John Lennon and Paul McCartney, you know. But so anyway, they recorded it because George Martin said, "Look, when you can write a song as good as this, I'll record it. Until then, this is what you'll do," which I am embarrassed about thinking even now. And so Brian Epstein thought the song was pretty good anyway, and he asked me if I would let Jerry and the Pacemakers record it, who I'd never heard of either. But Jerry's version was unbelievably good.
So when you heard his version, did you know immediately
Absolutely,
that's it?
Yeah, because I refused to sign a publishing contract based on the Beatles record. And then when they played me Jerry and the Pacemakers version, I was delighted. Where do I sign? I was very, very happy with that.
Extraordinary. And I'm intrigued to know, though, from that point that, you know, that was obviously your first hit, first number one. How do you get to that point with those people? Because you didn't come from a background of songwriters who were in the industry. So people can write amazing songs. That doesn't necessarily mean they're going to end up in the right place and become hits. How did you do it? To borrow your own lyric.
Oh, yeah, thank you. I suppose, listening to... I mean, when I started writing songs, I was just writing songs. And, you know, the fact that you finished a song doesn't mean it's going to make any money. And if it doesn't make money, you've got no career. So I eventually, somebody, you know, a few people gave me advice. I went to publishers and they said, "Yeah, it's all right. It's a very nice song, very, very well written and all the rest of it, but who cares about it?" I said, "You know something, you're right." They said, "Listen to more of what's being played and the ones that are hits." And that was the best advice, really. Listen to the successful ones, try to work out why and why they do better than others. So that helped a lot. And then I just kept going, you know. And I was in 1 year, I'd had my first number one. It only took me a year, luckily. Yeah, that was it. And how do you do it was exactly 1 year after I'd started writing properly.
That is extraordinary. And we will be talking much more to Mitch, all about his career, his music, and of course hearing his own music choices over the course of the next sort of 40 minutes or so. So if you've got any questions for him, 166 177, or you can email studio@manxradio.com.
The Nation Station, Manx Radio.
One Dental Clinic, sponsors of Women Today, offer convenient appointment times in the heart of Douglas, so you can fit your dental care into your working day.
You are listening to Women Today, but because it's a Friday, we are on the Conister Rock, and we're joined this afternoon by multi-award-winning songwriter Mr. Mitch Murray. We've had a lovely message in from Karen Mitch, who says, "Great memories and great songs from Mitch. Do you still have the yellow Rolls Royce?"
I do, Karen. And thanks for remembering.
There you go. Was this something that sort of...
I mean, do I still have it? No, I don't have it anymore, but I do remember it.
You do remember it. So obviously known for your cars as well, your car collection too. We were talking just before the ad there about sort of what it was like sort of growing up in Reading, your childhood there as well. Now, when you sent the information through to me, I was interested by the fact that you described the 50s as being an exceptionally dull era to grow up in.
Ditchwater. Oh, it was really terrible. On the other hand, we hadn't had much to compare it to at the time, you know. But I was compared it to World War II. It was nothing. Nothing. But I set out to try and make it as interesting as I could. And I was interested in being an autograph hunter. Mm-hmm. It's not exactly a career, but I did that, and I was living in London, so it made sense. You know, I was able to conduct my hobby by going into the West End and hanging around outside hotels like the Savoy and the Dorchester, and seeing the most important film stars of the day coming and going to radio stations like BBC, where you could write to the ticket unit and get free seats for these radio shows, and then you started mixing with all these people, and it was I made it really interesting in the end. I pretended to be a reporter, a photograph reporter from the children's newspaper, which did exist, but I had nothing to do with it, and I used that to get into all sorts of places. And at one point, my father bought me a birthday present. It was an electronic flash, one of the very, very first available to the public. And so that made me look the business, And because of that, it led to all sorts of things and fantastic photographs as well.
So that was sort of your first foray, really, into the showbiz world. Is that where you think you got a taste for it?
I'm sure it was, yes. I'm sure it was. I think with the music as well. And also the lifestyle, not actually having to do real work. It was just doing interesting stuff and keeping it, I didn't want to be in the 50s for my whole life, So, yes, it was, I'm sure that inspired it.
So do you feel then that your career as such in going into music, does it feel like it's been work, or does it not then?
No, not really. The only the ones that you feel were real work were the ones that didn't make it. So, I don't think positively about those anyway. And when I look back and I see all these crammed together, all the hits crammed together, you wonder how you ever did it. But in fact, at the time, there were long periods in between these hits where nothing was happening, or I was writing songs that really didn't make it. Not that many. I think compared to many writers, I was very, very fortunate.
And what did your parents think about the fact that you wanted to get into this industry? Because, it has to be said, obviously, this sort of showbiz world, quite a bad reputation, I'd imagine you as a youngster. Were they happy for you to be in that world?
Oh, I think so, yes. My father was pretty good about it. He gave me time. I used to work for him at the time, and I was a travelling salesman. I used to drive all over, and I was only 17. And I was driving all over the country selling handbags around the UK, and he was very good. He let me have some leave, so I could make my impact. I think he was pretty. He wasn't actually confident that I was going to do it. Let's put it that way. But he thought, you better get it out your system because you're no good to me.
Do you think that sort of stood you in good stead, though? Because I'm assuming as a salesman it would give you good sort of patter,
yes.
So that then when you're going in to sell your songs to people,
it does help. I mean, when you're a salesman, you actually have to brace yourself. You don't want to do it. Some days you think you're just not in the mood to try and sell people things. It teaches you when you're a professional salesman to pull yourself together, get up there and go in there and do it, even if you don't believe in it. So that does help, because then you've got to present songs to people. You've got to go into a record man's office and you've just got to upbeat things as it goes. The only difference is, of course, it's very simple. People either like it or they don't. With handbags, it's very different. You say, oh yes, but there's going to be a market for this, and there's going to be people, that's fine, you can flannel around with that, but you can't with songs.
Well, speaking of songs, let's hear another of your choices now. We have the Gypsy Kings. Why have you chosen this?
Oh, they are so electric when you listen to them. So much life in them. And I chose it because in the 50s, the dull 50s, there were one or two bright moments, and one was the music of the Italians, Marino Marini, who was so great, and all the songs he chose were so unbelievably melodic, and my favourite was Il Piove, means rain, I think, and Volare was the same song. It was called Piove or something like that. Volare is the one we all remember, and the Gypsy Kings did the most wonderful version of that.
I want to be there singing along with them,
Isn't
Mitch
that
Murray.
Wonderful?
Isn't
Oh,
it?
it's alive.
Absolutely brilliant. Now, just before we played Gypsy Kings there, you were saying, you were discussing that sort of notion of having to go in and sell your songs to record producers and publishers and the like. How do you do that? Do you just sort of go in and sort of sing it to them, or have you pre-recorded a version of it?
Used to make demos and demonstration records of those, and very often those things you had all the elements of the record as it was going to be, because people have a restricted imagination. You actually have to steer them, and don't forget, in those days the writers, once they said yes, we'll record it, the writers were out of the picture until it was finished, and so you had to give them stuff, otherwise it would never go into the record. Mm-hmm. So we used to do these demos, and we used to make them quite, like the record should be at the end. Of course, so many of them completely screwed it up, and others did, and eventually, this is why so many songwriters became record producers, because it wasn't the extra money you make from that, it was the control that you lose as a writer, or you did lose as a writer. And so this kept us so that we were in the studio, and if it was going to flop, it was our fault, nobody else's. That was really the reason for it.
And what is the one particular one that you think of and think, that's the one that got away?
Oh, there are a few of those, but really, that's no interest to anybody, really. So it's a very personal thing, and, and it doesn't happen. It's like playing around with time, If things were like this, then things would have been like that. Forget it. It's not positive enough.
Well, speaking of positive, then, who do you think is the for you best performance of your song?
Oh, I think I have to go back to Jerry Marsden and Tony Christie. Those two stood out.
Mm-hmm. And what incredible people to have worked with. We're getting lots of messages in. I'm going to read this one out. This is coming from Bill. Just tuned in to hear the compilation playing of your songs, Mitch. When I was younger, my parents played them all the time. They were always on the radio. Now in my 50s, and every time we as a family drive anywhere, we always put a compilation of your songs on. Cheers, mate.
Oh, thank you,
there
mate.
Thank you. Lovely message
Lovely.
From Bill coming in
50s,
there.
50s, eh? Oh, I've got underwear older than that.
And there's the one-liners coming out. Fantastic. We're going to get the next piece of music on just so I can make sure we get in as much as possible. You've chosen Bobby V as your next song.
Yes.
Why?
Just wonderful song. I love the song. And Bobby V represented a certain era, which was fabulous. And I just found that very, very inspiring. And this one, it was terrific. It's one of my favourite songs of all time.
'Cause the night has 1,000 eyes, and 1,000 eyes can't help but see.
Another excellent song choice from Mitch Murray there. Not surprisingly an excellent song choice, because I think it's fair to say you're clearly something of a music lover yourself, Mitch, not just a songwriter.
I quite like it, especially my own.
Do you ever tire of talking about music?
No, not really. No. No.
And do you sit and listen to music a lot?
Not often, no. But when I do, it's music of the 30s.
Yeah, I was going to say, is there
I have to keep
anyone
going
now?
back to that.
Yeah, is there anyone now that sort of grabs you?
I like Ed Sheeran. I think is very, very clever stuff. Very nice stuff. And I hear things. I hear things now, but I don't even know who wrote, who did them, who sang them. So I'm not actually into it. But there's some very, very good stuff still around.
Excellent. Well, that's good to know. Well, lots of messages coming in from Mitch. If you want to send anything to him, 166 177, or you can email studio@mexradio.com. We've had a question from someone who I think might be a songwriter themselves, so we'll come to that.
There will be a fee, of course, for an answer.
Well, of course, quite right too. We will put you in touch with the right people, but we'll come to that in just a moment. But we'll just get the handbrake out of the way first. So it is just coming up to 20 minutes to 3 now.
The Nation Station, Manx Radio.
Abbey Dental, sponsors of Women Today, for all aspects of today's dental care. Highly recommended throughout the Isle of Man.
And we are on the Conister Rock this afternoon with multi-award winning, I should say, songwriter Mitch Murray. 2 Ivor Novellos, Mitch. What does it mean to you to have won those? Does that matter to you?
No, it does matter, yes. And but at the time, it was less important. You didn't feel as honoured as you should have done. But I do now.
And which songs were they for?
Well, one of them was for, this is a good one. Was it Bonnie and Clyde? I'll never forget it.
That is such a wonderful tune, though, and that's one of those songs that is very much a story song. And I suppose that's one of the things is you have written.
Sorry
Go
to
ahead,
interrupt
yeah,
you.
yeah.
It was Billy Don't Be a Hero anyway.
Of course, Billy Don't
That's
Be a Hero.
another story song.
Yeah.
So there we go.
And that's the thing is that your different sort of styles and genres you've written across, from ballads to those story songs to pop, rock and roll, comedy songs as well. Is there any one genre that you prefer to write in, or that you find easier to write in?
I think story songs.
Uh-huh.
Yes, story songs like Bonnie and Clyde, Avenues and Alleyways. Yes, there's something about that. It gives you a format to follow.
Yeah.
Once you think of the story, then it's a little bit easier, and you know which direction you're going to go.
And Bonnie and Clyde, one of those songs that was a collaboration, wasn't it?
It was.
And from a long collaboration with Peter
Peter
Callender.
Callender, yes.
How does that process work when you're collaborating with someone?
Well, very, very well in that case. That's why it lasted so long. He passed away, unfortunately, a couple of years ago. But we really got on really well with this work, because Peter was mostly lyrics and I was mostly melody, although I'd written both. And in fact, I used to write lyrics for Les Reed, who is the melodist. So I was an all-rounder. But Peter had a very, very good, was a fabulous lyricist. And so that helped an awful lot. Can't remember the beginning of your question now, was it?
That's okay, because typically, as always happens with this show, we're very, very short on time. So what we'll do now, you mentioned before the break songs from the 1930s that you like to go back and listen to music from that sort of era. I believe you first got your sort of first record collection from your father, and so that presumably was songs from that era,
Yes,
was it?
he gave me all his 78s from the 30s. And I love the music. I was absolutely mad about the music. So melodic and so sincere. And every record is like a little gem, beautifully mixed. And which is more than you can say about many of the later ones that came along in the dreaded 60s.
And is that why your next choice was Alice Faye? Is that from a sort of similar sort of time
and
period?
That was one of my very favourites of that era. And also the writer, Harry Warren, who wrote with Al Dubin, and wrote all the Busby Berkeley fabulous show songs. I met him in Brazil at the Brazilian Song Festival in about 1967. I was so thrilled to meet him, because he wrote this and many, many wonderful others.
You say the sweetest things, baby. You have me riding high. Have me riding high.
It does seem somewhat unfair to only play these short snippets, especially to someone who is a songwriter themselves, Mitch. I apologise for having to cut these short, but we're just having such a lovely time chatting with you. That was Alice Faye, and you could just hear in the background Jack Oakey there, because that is a version from the film that it featured in, which I'm not sure the name of the film, but the song was called You Say the Sweetest Things. We haven't yet touched on the fact that, obviously, as we mentioned at the start of the show, you've written 5 books, obviously after dinner speeches. You've helped a lot of people, including Stephen, who messaged in to say, as well as writing fantastic music, Mitch has written some great books to help with writing speeches. They helped me write a groom speech for my wedding, as well as many other speeches for work. I've had the books for over 20 years, longer than the marriage.
I was about to say, I do hope you have continue to have cause to thank me, but I'm not so sure.
He's obviously learnt about the one-liners as well, judging by that email. Very good. And someone as well, we had a message from Elaine, which was really lovely, saying that she used to work as an assistant in Woolworths, and you would come in sometimes looking for extension cables from your studio, and she said she didn't believe you to start with, and you were very polite despite her rudeness. So she said thank you very much for being polite. Lots of messages, lots of people asking for advice about songwriting. So we've had quite a few. John Dog as well, who's messaged in saying he's written some lyrics for songs. What can I do with them? Do you actually give advice much to sort of budding songwriters and budding musicians?
Well, not particularly. No, if I'm asked, I'll usually come up with some stuff, but none of it can be. You can't have a model because there are no models in this business. Mm-hmm. You know, everything, and there are exceptions to every rule as well. So I can't offer you much.
And yet, having said that, one of said books that you've written, How to Write a Hit Song, was picked up by someone who did really rather well from having read it, a certain Gordon Sumner.
Yes, Sting. I knew him before he was something that came from a bee's posterior. Many, many years ago.
And he approached you once, didn't he?
Yes.
To thank
Well,
you.
the first time I met him, it was at an awards show, and he came up and he says, "Hello, Mitch Murray, I'm Sting." I said, "Yes, I think I know that." It was very sweet. And he told me why, when he was a kid, he was 12 or 13, he got my book, How to Write a Hit Song, and it got him started in songwriting, which is, I'm really delighted with that. And he actually wrote the foreword to one of my books later, so which is very, very lovely.
Oh, just lovely. And I assume that a lot of the stuff that's in that book would still apply to anyone writing songs now.
Yes, a lot of it, and a lot of it won't, of course, because the market's changed, and the way of exploiting songs has changed totally as well. But it's a good collector's item, if nothing else. In fact, you have to really work hard to find one.
Well, we mentioned at the very top of the show, I can't believe we're pretty much at the end here, but we mentioned at the top of the show one of the songs you're most proud of and has been most successful for you was Down Came the Rain. Now, we're going to play a version in just a moment by Jovine. You mentioned sort of the Italians have picked up on this particular song and done some fantastic versions. But before we do, I want to remind people of your own version of this song, which is just extraordinary. So this is Mitch Murray and Down Came the Rain.
We walked by the sea for a long, long time. I knew somehow she was nearly mine. The look in her eyes told me this. But just as we stopped for a kiss, down came the rain. It's happened again. The thunder and lightning. Down came the rain.
Mitch Murray, that is extraordinary. That is Down Came the Rain. What were you trying to do when you first wrote that song? What was the intention?
Well, I was taking the mickey out of my writing partner, Peter Callender, who couldn't say "ah" properly. It's really, really good. So I was taking the mickey a lot, but that was why it came back. And also, the whole thing, there were no jokes in it. It was a comedy song, but it was the impact of a sudden surprise or a shock. And really, hit songwriting is surprise. That's half of it. You don't expect what you're going to hear much of the time. Like comedy, there's another one.
Which is why I suppose it led you into to sort of writing comedy as well.
Very similar.
Yeah, the
thing.
sort of instant hit, I suppose. And so your final choice then is a particular person's version of that song, and it's Jovine. So just tell us how this came about.
Well, it came about because in Italy there was a group called I Giganti, who were around at the time Down Came the Rain original. They recorded a straight version of it, just as a ballad. And so somebody over there must have said, "Oh, this is a very interesting tune. I like this melody. I like this." And there's me going, "Yeah," trying to make a fool of myself. And they do it as a serious song. And it's become such a big hit. Not just the one version. There are loads and loads of versions in Italy. And this one is one of my favourite versions because it's upbeat and happy.
And we will end with this one. But before we do, I should ask, are you still writing songs now, Mitch? Or have you sort of put the pen down?
I put the pen down and I can't find it anywhere.
Mitch, it's been an absolute joy to share this hour with you. I wish we had more time to chat, but you'll have to come back and do another one for us.
Thank you, Christy. You made it really fun. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, we will end with that, again, wonderful and very different version of Down Came the Rain. It is Jovine and Una Ragazza in Due. Is that sort of how you say it?
One fellow between two women.
Yeah, well done. And if you've missed any part of this programme, you can go back and listen after the programme. If you go to manxradio.com, you can find the on-demand feature there. But also, we will, of course, post a little video clip and you'll be able to listen on the podcast as well in the future. But for now, Mitch Murray, thank you so much for being our guest this afternoon.
Thank you.
My lady dog. E che muoio per
One Dental Clinic, sponsors of Women Today, offer convenient appointment times in the heart of Douglas, so you can fit your dental care into your working day.